Hey, just before we start the show, I just want to let you know we've got a new feature here that allows you to leave us a recorded message. I know sometimes there are things we're going to say on the show that you take issue with, that you agree with, we've missed the point, whatever it might be. So it's simple. Just go to the show notes and you'll find a link there that allows you just hit the record button, have your say, and it'll land in our inbox. And we'll probably include it in upcoming shows. So thanks for doing that. Now here's the show.
An original.
From Story Studio Network.
Once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
Let's get ready to rumble!
It's showtime.
Here we go. It's a Friday, November the 24th. Month and a day, and it's all over but the crying, right? Look at that. Where did it all go? Holy cow. Welcome in. Dave Trafford here. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network. And we'll call this one, it's a Two Hoots Friday. How about that? It's just, oh my God, it was hilarious. And if you don't understand the reference, it was the premier talking about why they are not going to have any measurable amount of conversation around the latest Greenbelt bill. And Keith, the premier just insists on being the folksy guy that he is. But boy, I'm telling you, to suggest that people don't really give a rat's rectum about the Greenbelt flies entirely in the face of the bill that they've got on the table, which is reversing the Greenbelt decision that they made. Of course, people give two hoots about it.
Kind of, yeah. Your biggest government climb down, your signature policy, and you've had to back right off of it, do a complete 180. And yeah, you're saying no. I think when someone tells you who they are, believe them. We knew all along
exactly.
the premier did not believe in the Greenbelt. And so when he's pushing this legislation through, he actually says because they're having, by the way, it's at committee, this Bill 60, which is going to put those lands back into the Greenbelt that they took out and make it tougher for anyone else to take them out. And at committee, at second reading, this is usually where you have public hearings. So there's going to be only 1 hour of public hearings, and the entire hour will be taken up by the housing minister, Paul Calandra. So, in other words, they do not want to hear anything about the Greenbelt scandal itself or any of the things that led to it. There's a lot of details, a lot of real good questions to be asked here, and we're just not going to get a chance to do that. And so responding in the legislature, the premier said, well, you know why you're not hearing from the public about this? Because the public doesn't give two hoots about the Greenbelt. So, again, this just shows you his real commitment to the Greenbelt itself. He does not believe, he believes in landowners' rights, that they should be able to basically do whatever they want with this property that they own. Speculators be darned. He doesn't care, it seems. But his government's been forced this way. But as you say, how to drive the conversation exactly in the opposite direction you're supposed to be going with your own legislation, your own apology, because he went back up in the polls after the apology. He went back up to 40% range, which, as John will gladly point out for us, is definitely majority government territory again. And yet, it just shows that not only was the apology not sincere, the legislation itself has clearly been something forced on him by public opinion.
Well, John, the problem with all of this is that they had an opportunity to salve some wounds with this new legislation when putting stuff back into the Greenbelt. For example, we've got this cry from the mayors in the area who are saying, wait, we started making plans about, new infrastructure and all this stuff that we were going to have to deal with. And then we heard from a guy who owns a piece of property that was incorrectly included in the Greenbelt because of a mapping problem, they called it. It's been years in the courts. It finally has come to a situation where they've got an agreement. They're signing off on an agreement to take this piece of property out of the Greenbelt. Then all of this happens, and they say, well, we don't need that, so it's out of the Greenbelt now. Now that they got the legislation, they're putting it back in the Greenbelt for this guy. I mean, it's crazy. So there are so many things around this that there's no eye to detail that just keep creating more problems for themselves. I realize that people might not be down in the weeds on this, but we've said this over the last 2 months. Every week, there's something else that's being added to the burn here.
Yeah, two things on that. Number one is that it is a ham-fisted approach. I mean, you're using a blunt instrument in a crisis situation, so it's going to have a whole lot of victims and a whole lot of other consequences that you can't kind of anticipate. And so there are going to be things like that. But back to your point on how folksy the premier is. I mean, it's a legend that this premier lives by his cell phone, and he has people who call, and he likes to talk and to do retail politics to people. And it may not be the thing that people are raising at the door or on the phone to him. I mean, it's more about healthcare and deficits in housing and things like that. But this is a case where the cheese slipped off the cracker. I mean,
to borrow a phrase.
It's a turn of phrase, which, to Keith's point, and I'm not so much sure that there's a motive behind it other than he was trying to brush it off in a folksy kind of way, and he isn't hearing about it anymore since they did it. But it also reflects the fact that he's not a disciplined politician. A disciplined politician would have said simply, this is a matter which is being taken seriously by my government. And as you can tell from the legislation here, we are taking every step appropriately in order to blah, 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 and sit down. I mean, that's all you have to do or refer it to Paul Calandra and just sort of go, my minister is cleaning up the mess that I made, and I'm sorry about that, but here you go. Like there's different ways in which you deal with it. I really think that he's more naive than manipulative in this, and that it was simply, he doesn't hear about it anymore because people, and he's right, we don't hear about it as much as we did a few weeks ago, but it certainly is there. It is a huge reverse engine on the battleship Ford, and it's caused a great wake, and it's not over by any means. But to him, it may seem like years ago that this thing actually was put on the back burner, but when in fact it's still very much alive.
But to Dave's point, it should be on the back burner already. Yeah. But this one parcel in Markham, we'll back up a little bit. This whole thing came when they tried to take out 7,400 acres in 15 parcels. We learned that 14 of those parcels were picked by political staff because they basically didn't meet the criteria that the government staff, the civil servants, would have allowed. The 15th parcel was this one in Markham that should have been excluded. That was meant to be excluded in 2015 at the 10-year review would absolutely should have been excluded now in this one. So this legislation, though, just puts it right back into the courts and into the news headlines. Instead, the government saying we're putting 14 of these 15 parcels back. No one would have balked at all that there was this one that all along should have been out. There was a great case for it. The civil servants had made a case for it being excluded from the Greenbelt. So it's another self-inflicted wound. Just make this 14 of the 15, explain why. There's rationale for this one. No, we're going to force this back in. Well, the guy's back in court, and rightly so. A deal with this government is apparently not a deal. So that's what gives everyone hope on the Ontario Place thing. That's another issue.
Yeah, and I don't know all the details of it at all, just basically what you folks have said. But again, a ham-fisted approach to legislation has many victims. Yeah. It may liberate one or two ministers who are having a tough day in the House, but this is going to have consequences in many significant ways. Can you imagine, again, I don't know the details of this, but can you imagine going to court on this anyways? The cost involved, all of those sort of things. And then all of a sudden hearing that you're back in the game again as it was before. I know that the ministers can make immediate decisions to exempt people and do things like that. That's their prerogative. They can do it. But we're caught up in a process. As I said, it's ham-fisted and it's going to take time. And it's got a lot of other victims that are going to come forward. And it's got a lot more investigations to be done. So it's not over by a long shot. But all of our conversation today is prompted by a slip of the cheese off the cracker.
So what do you think the odds are, Keith, that the housing minister sits down at the committee hearing and offers an amendment that takes this one out, right? I mean, he could do that.
That would be the smart move. Absolutely. That would be the way to go. But he's not actually indicated he's willing to do that at this point. They just want to, get this through. And he basically, when pressed in the House, why would you do this for a full hour? And he basically came back with, I'm a pretty entertaining guy. I can fill an hour, which, that kind of glib, that's worse than the Premier's folksy two hoots in a sense, because we get where Ford is coming from. With Calandra, it seems almost vindictive. I'm just going to do this because I can. There's a bare minimum we have to do. And we can say we had public hearings at committee.
Well, to your point, it's performative. I mean, that's all it is,
Absolutely.
Right?
Entirely. And almost as this legislation is, because it was done without legislation. It could have been undone without legislation, but we're making it tougher. We're going to do this. All of this is performative. But and to John's point, and needlessly stupid in areas, just bringing other issues up that could have been quelled in the original bill. No one would have said a word. Just bad comms. It's just policy issues and communications are just such a basic thing. And for a second-term government to be struggling this far or at this stage of the game is quite surprising.
Well, they came out of the gate that way. I mean, really,
well, that's what
there was their interregnum there called the pandemic. But really, back to your point, believe somebody when they tell you or they show you who they are, right? I mean, that's the way we began. Listen,
we saw growth. We saw growth in the pandemic.
Yeah, we did.
The Premier's response, but it seems that it stopped at the end.
Yeah, once the lockdowns ended, look at that, we can get out and be ourselves again.
Yes,
literally. NDP, their provincial council is meeting, and oh dear, this gets more difficult for Marit Stiles, Keith, just because I guess they've got the is it Hamilton Center now that's digging up the Sarah Jama story all over again.
Yep. The Hamilton Center NDP Riding Association wants on the provincial council meeting to hold a leadership review of Stiles and to have her bring Jama back into the NDP caucus. I think the second thing is something they could actually work on if they could get some sort of agreement from Sarah Jama on, the whole idea of caucus unity and staying on message, which clearly was the problem. Not her message, but the problem of not staying on message was I think the issue, just no caucus discipline whatsoever. So I think the two things, though, taking it to the point of demanding a leadership review of a leader who's been in the job, is it a year? Barely? And who came in, let's face it, the Liberal leadership race gives us such a bold, clear example of what Stiles and the NDP did not benefit from, which was a leadership contest. She just showed up in the job one day to the point, I'm sure to this day, a great many Ontarians aren't sure who the Ontario opposition leader is. And yet the Liberals, they've signed up 100,000 new members. They're going to have a vote. Their new leader is going to come in with much better chances and much better name recognition than Stiles, who had, just unopposed and became leader in an acclamation. That's not how politics, it certainly did not benefit her or the party. But there's a continual struggle over the issue of Sarah Jama and publicly demanding leadership reviews. And what is the point of that? You've got the Ford government on the ropes, on the defensive, on so many fronts, and you're out there with guns shooting at both your feet at the same time. It's very unfortunate. These sorts of things, I mean, all parties struggle with these kinds of things. Deal with them in the back rooms, not in public motions to review your leader who's been in the job a year.
Well, John, I'm thinking that anybody in the NDP who was slightly considering running for that job a year ago was now thinking, oh, God, I'm glad I didn't do that.
Well, I don't think the public's paying any attention to this stuff. I mean, you and I are all looking at it and we all hear about this stuff, but I don't think anybody else knows about it. Number two, though, then when you do this and let's remember, she's been censured by the House. This is not just a NDP circumstance. But they're going to fight tooth and nail to get her back in that job. That's all there is to it. You have a constituency that worked hard on a campaign to get her elected, believed very much in that candidate, and is now sitting in oblivion. And they're going to fight tooth and nail to get her back on. So if the leader's office is not answering your phone calls, then the only way in which you get known is you take the members of your executive and the people who voted for her in the run-up to the election, and you get them involved. It's a grassroots movement to try and put pressure on the leader's office. So everything you've said is true. It's going to take away from much other issues. It's going to be a festering wound that the leader has to deal with, all of those things. But it's a juggernaut because there's nothing to lose. And so they will stay at this. Look, it's politics. It's the worst group to anger are experienced politicos, right? They know how to work and game the system, and they know what's at play here. The other thing you're going to find, though, is that as we saw in Jagmeet Singh's review, is that the Palestinian question is alive and well in factions of the NDP in places that are not so much in other parties, nor are they publicly. We do see lots of people who are within the party and within unions who have views that mirror hers. And so getting it to a wider scope of people in a room brings the chances for two things to happen. Number one, a wider acceptance that the leader should be challenged. And the second thing is more demonstrations. This is theater as well. So I just look at this and say, look, you make these decisions, and I'm not judging whether it was right or wrong, but it unleashes consequences. This is the whole thing for both Ford and for Premier Ford and for the leader of the NDP. They say things, they do things, and it unleashes through blunt instruments these consequences which are beyond their control. So it's going to fester. It's going to be there. And yes, there are other issues to deal with. But for that riding association, I'm telling you, it's a game and game on.
Well, and the Kitchener Centre election is a week from today, or a week Thursday, right? Coming up on Thursday. So, all of this is very much going to be, at the doorstep. But Keith, on the other side of this is Goldie Ghamari. She's the MPP in Carleton, and is getting criticized again because she's criticizing the government of Iran, not Iran itself, and the Islamic State such as it is. And there are those who are complaining that she's being Islamophobic, where she's coming out and saying, well, no, I stand up for the rights of women and the rights of all the people of Iran and all that kind of thing. So it's an interesting sort of mirrored version of what's going on. The Premier standing behind what she has to say. And I'm not sure any right-minded person would argue with her.
No. Well, there's absolutely some people arguing with her or with, as you say, comparing these two situations. She is being extremely critical, and I think most of us would agree, with the policies of the government of Iran and the Republican Guard. I mean, she just straight up, I think all the Western world is pretty much on side with what she's saying, but that she's allowed to say this in the legislature with no repercussions. She's a government member, whereas Sarah Jama, as you say, elected 7-8 months ago. So it's not like, and her policies were well known by the people in Hamilton Center when they elected her. So for her to not, be allowed to speak on the Palestinian issue at all in the legislature or speak on any other issue is flat out wrong. I think the NDP and Marit Stiles are best positioned at this point. If they can't get Sarah Jama to agree to some caucus solidarity, at least lobby on her behalf to get her voice back in the legislature. The Liberals would, I think, support. I think Mike Schreiner would support as well. You don't have to agree with anything this woman is saying, but you do have to agree she was elected and has a right to speak in the legislature. It's only the Ford government that voted to censure her in the House. They're the ones that need to reverse this decision. But I think Stiles could go a long way by saying, we absolutely want to support Jama to have this say. Ghamari, again, whether you agree with her or not, she's allowed to have her say. Why isn't Sarah Jama? These are both, issues in that part of the world that most of us avoid conversations about because A, we don't know nearly enough about it to converse well and, intelligently. And B, it's just so fraught with history and complications and division that it's just not our issues to deal with, so we don't. I mean, I'm not saying people shouldn't, but most of us, these are not front of mind issues for us other than we see in the news and we're shocked by the horror of it all, but we don't understand the issues, as I say, well enough to really get in and debate them.
Yeah, John, I would say on both issues, whether it was the conversation about Iran or Hamas Israel, we would say, well, it's important to have the context. Even that word lately has been demonized because, well, you can't contextualize. And I understand how they're using that word, but these conversations become incredibly difficult to have. If you cannot bring that up in the Legislative Assembly and feel comfortable doing that, I don't care where it is. I mean, it's happening in Congress in Washington as well, right? It's so, to me, this is a kind of a dangerous place for us to be around our elected assemblies.
It's a very dangerous place because it's what it suggests is, and let's take this issue out of the fray for a moment. It could be any issue. If you have a majority government, then you can use the hammer. It's ham-fisted. It has consequences. The bigger issue is not so much the NDP fighting within themselves about this, but if it were on another issue, you could start targeting, and you could censure 5, you could censure 7. Well, where does it stop? So my question is more constitutional. Where do you go with this? It's a bigger issue. People in a constituency, we've always said on this program and publicly, the final verdict is left in the hands of the voters. If they want to censure her, they'll kick her ass out and they won't have her there. If they want her in the House, they'll put her there. And that's basically what will happen. And yeah, it's a few years away, but to take a majority government and to slam her out the door for whatever reason. And a lot of it damn well is politics, right? We know it. But this is a bigger issue of where do you go in the Court of Appeal? You can't appeal the speaker in this. I don't believe you can. Do you take it to court? Do you say effectively that because of being censored here, we are losing our constitutional ability to have our voice heard in the legislature on not just this, but other issues, and have the constitutional issue debated somewhere at a higher level and get an injunction put? Like, I don't know, because the legislature is supreme. But on the other hand, freedom of speech trumps. I mean, it really does. And especially if you're offended by it, but you're not injured by it, that's a whole different kettle of fish. So I think it has consequences here that people are really not grasping. And so the NDP, I get it. The NDP are going after the leader and stuff like that. But I think the bigger game here is how could it be that if you were a liberal, or whether you were Mike Schreiner, who said something, and all of a sudden the majority government decided to censure you. That eliminates your voice as a constituent in the second biggest legislature in the country. And I think that's where you, and I mean, Canada's federal parliament is only bigger. Like, where do you go with this? Because there is a constitutional issue here. Mm-hmm. There's actually a charter of rights issue here. And I'm not sure how you deal with it, but I'll leave it to lawyers and other learned people. But there is an issue on the table here, because it could extend to 5 or 10 or 20. In South America, they just obliterate parties by saying, when you open your mouth, you go to jail. Like, I don't want to take it to that extreme, but the reality is it's almost the same. You open your mouth on a topic, you're offended by it. It may not be the right thing, but it's an internal party issue as opposed to a parliamentary issue.
Well, she's now appealed to the clerk's office, or sent the clerk's office a notice that will be seeking a judicial review. Now, I don't know which judge would be willing to accept that review, but if there is one, as you say, there are constitutional rights issues at stake here. So normally courts have no say over what goes on in the legislature at all. The speaker's ruling here is paramount. But seeking a judicial, and I think you're, I'm not clear at all where it goes with this notice that she's seeking a judicial review, unless there's a court that accepts it as a filing, and then we have paperwork and things begin. I mean, I don't know how it would work from here.
No, and I don't know either. But this is the conundrum, isn't it? Because it's a case of both the individual who is within the legislature, who is then appealing to the clerk and goes to the speaker and all of that sort of stuff, and there'll be a ruling on it at some point. Who knows when? But it's also a case of a constituent. I may not have elected her, but I still have rights to have my voice heard in that.
Yeah, it's
house.
almost like a class action on behalf of the constituency, right?
Well, and that's it. So there's another prong to this that we haven't seen, and maybe that's where this gets dealt with. I don't know, but this is the beginning of a process that's going to have a very interesting
but path. It's one of those things. As soon as you start to build rules around this kind of stuff, it probably makes it worse, John. Right? I don't know too many political decisions have made things a lot better. There's a lot of loose ends to everything.
Well,
a lot of
maybe as we go to more right-wing governments, we're going to need more restraints on what governments can and can't do, because they're going in ways we've never seen them go before.
Look, there's a difference between what governments are and the legislature itself. This is a place where you're allowed to stand up and basically say anything you want and not get sued by somebody outside the house. You step outside the house, you're free game. What we've done is, even though people will disagree vehemently with her position, she has been removed de facto from the political debate. Like, done. Like, not just put in the back row and maybe recognized at the end of question period once a week for a question. She's done. And I think this is something that really has to be thought about. And the only people right now who can reverse it is the government, because it has the majority.
Well, they did it in the first place. That's what, if all of the legislature, if the Libs, the Independents, and the Greens had all voted with them, and it was so, every other member of the legislature, maybe there would be some defense. But it wasn't. It was a majority government censuring one opposition member. Well, really? It raises all sorts of questions, ethical questions, and I think most people, as you say, would agree. That's the whole point of it, isn't it? That we can agree and disagree with you completely, except for our agreeing with your right to say what you need to say.
Well, and to be fair, this tendency is not just a right wing issue. I mean, you might suggest that Sarah Jama is being as illiberal as the conservative majority is. I mean, in terms of shutting out any kind of thoughtful, considered debate, even if it's uncomfortable. I mean, she has completely dismissed that. So we have, the makings of this is a real problem. I had Ujwal Arkalgud, he's a cultural anthropologist, on the podcast this week. And we talked specifically about the state of politics around the world, particularly in Canada and the United States. And this illiberal movement is getting very scary. It's not nearly as problematic here in Canada as it is in the United States, but we're seeing it right here in this legislature, where we have populists and progressives, right? Liberals don't mean anything anymore. I mean, all due respect to the folks who are going to cast ballots this weekend, and we should get to that. But it's an interesting posture that we find ourselves in, where now politics is based more on our sort of belief system, as opposed to talking about issues that matter to the general community or the population from a right wing or a conservative or a liberal perspective.
Yeah, but this is a different issue. I mean, when you have 5 neighbors in my street who have taken down the mezuzah because they fear for their lives, when you have friends of mine who live in the Bathurst and Wilson area who have had the photographs of their house taken and they know it because the police arrested some guy who had been paid by a group to come down and photograph all of their houses for whatever purpose. When you have people who are volunteering to go to their shuls and to their synagogues as a security patrol and keeping their kids home, when you have people on my street who retire from their job, shut off their lights, and live in the back of their house, this is beyond, just the issues we want to talk about. This is incendiary, and it's setting off a chain of events, and I don't know where it's all going to end, that are life altering. And so we're dealing with something that's different here. This is an emotional powder keg. It is using words and terminology to the conflict that we haven't heard in many ways for a generation. So it's very, very serious. And I think the real issue here is, and I don't want to step on it in any way, but there will be a movement at some point that says, leave your hate at home. The bigger debate that we're having here is that by the year 2045, somewhere between 2041 and 2045, the natural growth of this country will be fueled 100% by immigration. That's it. Because we're half a baby short, for goodness sake. Now, I did my bit. We have 4 kids in this family. But everybody else is a half a baby short, pretty much. And as a result of that, there are more immigrants coming. There are more people coming. So whether it's refugees or whatever, they're on their way, and we can't stop it because they're going to be looking after us in the healthcare system and all these other places. And this is going to be a tension. I think we talked about this on one of our podcasts. This is going to be a continual tension where international events are going to invade, what we call our Canada. And it's just a transition. I don't know where it's going to end, but what I do know is that when you've got the Gardiner Expressway, which is backed up for, a handful of minutes, people jump out of their cars and raise Palestinian flags, and they interrupt, or go against local politicians at fundraisers and things like that. I don't know what it does to get people on your side. I don't know, but their audience is much bigger. Their audience is not Torontonians. Their audience is global. So they see what's going on in San Francisco and the blocking of a bridge there. So they decide they're going to do it here. It's all organized, and with social media, it can be right in your back door before you even know it. So it's a bigger issue, and governments haven't responded yet to it. And I don't know how they're going to, because we're using the apparatus of what was Canada. This is the new Canada. It's a very different situation that we roll into in the next 15 years, and we're not adapted to it.
We're used to debating issues. There is no debate here. There's no one's listening to the other, literally no listening to the other side. Your colonial settlers, this mentality, requesting a debate is wrong. We're coming at it from the wrong. So you talked about liberalism. I think that's kind of at the core of the liberalism. I think this is what the Ontario Liberal Party is hoping to see, is that, get away from all the bullshit and actually have policies that help people, social programs that lift, and get away from all this other world stuff and get down to real practicalities, the liberal ideas of progressivism, helping people one-on-one, having debates about issues. That shouldn't be wrong to want to have a debate. We may disagree completely, but we should be able to at least hammer out some see if we can find some common ground. But there's no attempt at all with this issue to find any common ground. It's hate on both sides. And on one side, the smaller community is just scared shitless. And it's just shocking to see people afraid. You talked about on your street in Toronto. Before I left Toronto, we had a place in Washago, which is between Orillia and Gravenhurst. Nice little place, very small little community. Saw on the global news a Jewish family there. Again, someone peering in their window at first. They got a picture of them. They go out to dinner. They come back. Someone has spray painted slogans on their garage door. They're scared to death. This is in a small community where everyone knows everyone pretty much. Who's doing this? And to have that level of fear and refusing to consider the other side is just, no, there's no debate. You're someone who needs to be annihilated, not listened to. I don't know where we go from here, but we were already pretty divisive. And this just is going to make it so much worse if we don't somehow get back to debating ideas and policies.
The issue for me is twofold. Number one, this is a political dilemma where the governing party says, look, as long as the opposition is dealing with this stuff and they're in disarray, it's good for us. We can go out and we can talk about healthcare. We can deal with all that stuff. There is a much bigger issue here that we haven't talked about. And it's just like, we're running out of money and we have so many demands for it. What the hell are we going to do? There's that. But the second thing was just the reaction from York University and Concordia. Is that kind of where we want our society to go? That you have the freedom to do all these things, which include some measure of hate. When you say we're going to protect free speech, but at the same time you protect those who scream and yell and accuse people of doing things and threaten them, but there's no adequate police response to it or security. What it means is that civil society itself has come apart. So you got a choice. The premier could be standing at a podium saying enough is enough. And he's got back with him a whole series of the police departments behind him. He's got Toronto, he's got Welland, he's got Durham, he's got everybody. He says, look, whether you're Muslim or whether you are Jewish or whatever, we can't tolerate this in our society. We're going to do something about it. So he appears this morning, with his Solicitor General, and he's going to answer questions about Greenbelt and a bunch of other things, but he's not going to be doing this. And this is where, I think Justin Trudeau, when you take a look and you ask a polling question, of which, as I've said before, there's hardly any polling on this. Hardly any polling whatsoever. Everybody's kept their head down. But if you ask the question whether or not the government of Canada has taken the right route on this, you're going to get the public split into thirds. Yes, there's been too much of it. There's been a good response. No, there hasn't been a response enough. And then Goldilocks in the middle saying, yeah, I think it's just right the way it is. And so Trudeau, you can criticize him as much as you want, but politically has managed to share the road with as many of these factions without polarizing. But there is an issue about public safety that you can go down, that the Prime Minister says we can't tolerate this, but it really is the provincial legislature that you can call some solidarity for making sure that this is protecting people in their own backyards. And I think that's what's kind of missing here. And maybe it's maybe the police feel overwhelmed by the hundreds of thousands that come out or whatever. The only one that we've seen so far is the Indigo red paint splash where 10 or 11 people were arrested under hate crimes, yesterday. But there's a lot more of it going on. And the question is whether or not we want to have this in our society on a continuing basis, or whether we want the police and others with that kind of jurisdiction to step up and nail as many as possible.
Well, I dare say that I think the reason that we are here is because we have failed, to Keith's point, to talk about the issues historically. Like we've avoided it, whether it was newsrooms avoided it. If I don't know about you, Keith, but if you were on the assignment desk and trying to figure out exactly what the news of the day was going to be, you knew where the grenades were. And sometimes it was a story you had to cover, but sometimes there was a no-win way of covering a story. And I think historically, culturally, in this part of the world, we have not paid enough attention to what's gone on in the Middle East, in Iran, et cetera. And now it's really difficult to have any really kind of meaningful discourse or conversation. I think we're past it.
I don't know what to say to that, really. As I say, I think many of us are just not well enough informed to be having a debate on this issue. We can only watch in horror at what we see going on internationally. And then when we see it spilling over into our neighborhoods, into our communities, and what we see spilling over is the hate, is the division. It's scary. It's very, very scary. And it's, as we like to say, that's not the Canadian way. It's just in our core, which just feels wrong. And a great many of us will look to newcomers or Canadians who have been here for many generations, but are feeling this because they're from those regions and say, didn't you come here to leave that behind? Well, yes, you did, but you can't leave this behind, can you?
There's another part to this, Keith, and I want to ask this both to you two, because I think you can avoid the debate. And that's the thing that people want to do today, because they feel, whether you're a corporation or even a pollster, that if you go out with something, you're on one side or the other, and you are going to be attacked. There is a middle issue here, and I wonder whether or not reporters feel it as well, and that is, you should be available to say whatever you want, as long as it's within the limits of not harming another person directly. And here we have a situation where no one is willing to speak except the two sides that have the greatest passion and views on it. But there's no protection for the people in the middle either. And so I put it to you as reporters, that's not the headline. That's not the editorials. That's not the coverage. The coverage is the debate, as opposed to how do we protect ourselves as Canadians, and how do we allow a civil society to go about doing it? And what's the responsibility of politicians to ensure that?
Well, I just think that it's fraught with anxiety as soon as you ask a question now. It's not about making statement anymore. You know, if I were to ask any one of the people that you have contacted, John, and been in contact with, what's at the issue here, and I let them have their say. And it doesn't matter if all of a sudden, then I have to find the other side of the story. So baked into our culture in media is the idea that somehow this is as valuable or as important as the other. So you run the risk of the tyranny of the minority oftentimes. I'm not suggesting that's the case here, but merely by asking a question in terms of why someone is threatened or why they feel offended or whatever it might be, it prompts an answer and a screaming match almost immediately from somebody who was not included in that conversation. I don't know that there is a middle ground or a way of getting around that without inciting debate or more, screaming and yelling from both extremes. I just don't know where you go with it.
We have to somehow eliminate talking points from everyone. It's not just the politicians anymore. As you say, it's anyone we want to talk to. If they're at a protest somewhere, they've got several talking points. Most people you want to walk up to an interview with, they are drilled in. You're hearing the same words come out of their mouths. Yep. The same words. And social media, of course, as John said, it helps you organize and spread this message. But no. What do you think? What got you off the couch and out to this protest today on a shitty rainy day? Why are you, what is in your heart? Is it just hate? Is it just yelling at those people? What, no, well, I firmly believe we're being hurt. Well, okay, how can we fix you being hurt? That we're having a debate, but we've asked, but as you say, just merely asking a question, but ignoring the issue.
But even the question that you posed was charged just because you're out here. Are you out here because of hate? I mean, but you've lit the fuse.
But I asked first, why are you here? Is it,
I get it. But
yeah, you're right. And that's probably the wrong way to pose the question. Are you here out of love for those people that you're screaming that you want to kill? But even we're getting down in the weeds in the newsroom decisions. But edit all this out. You're going to get me in trouble.
But at this point, we are conditioned in the newsroom to go and ask the provocative question because you want a provocative answer. Let's face it. But there's such tinder here socially. It takes nothing to spark it and light a wildfire.
And our media culture, as you point out, has been fueled by the whole both sidesism and conflict. Conflict is what we're almost in the business of, and look where it's gotten us. And John's point about focusing back on ideas and policies, focusing on conflict has got us where we are. Absolutely, as have all the issues that brought it. But could we be dealing with this in a better way? I think that's a whole other show. But absolutely, the media bear some of the blame here. No two ways about it.
My final comment on this is simply this. I think this has galvanized something that we really haven't come to grips with yet. Just because the current crisis comes to an end at some point, it's given birth to something in our society, which we didn't have before. And that is an organization of disparate parts who are on their talking points, who are on a mission, who are going to continue along the lines. And this is going to be a very interesting influx into our political stream.
All right. So just a reminder, we've got a feature on the show now that you can go to the show notes and just click the link and you can send us your view, add your voice to the show. Just record a message. It drops into our inbox. And I think there might be a few things that came up in the last 45 minutes that might be worth comment. So please do that. And we'll be happy to include those conversations. Maybe to Keith's point, how should we be addressing this from a questions perspective? I think there's real conundrum here on so many levels. So if you've got a thought on it, feel free, share it. If you've hung in this long, thanks for sticking with us. That'll do it. Next week, we'll be just on the verge of finding out who leads the Liberal Party here in Ontario. That will be the Friday edition, the last Friday, I guess. No, it'll be the 1st of December. Oh, my. Look at that. All right. Well, new month, new leader. Here we go. That'll do it. It's On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast for Story Studio Network.
This is SSN.
Story Studio Network.